So welcome back to the Cloud Computing Insider, the one place where we tell you how to make cloud computing work for your enterprise. As always, I'm your host, David Linthicum, author, speaker, B-list geek. And today we have a great topic talking again about private clouds. I know you guys love private clouds. Every time I post a private cloud video, it just gets swamped out there because I think people think it's kind of the new option as to where things are going. And it's I'll put an article that I just read out on the register.com, which just came into my reader yesterday. And a quote from the article would be, yet even organizations move beyond development and trials for development of AI models. A lack of clarity over ongoing and reoccurring costs or inferencing services is becoming a concern. And so what we're seeing is a couple of things. Number one, we're seeing that everybody is interested in AI. We're moving in that way. And the public cloud providers aren't necessarily going to be the default answer in every step. So that's why we have public clouds that are going to be an option moving forward. And if we think about it, we're moving into a complex, heterogeneous world. And I think that's going to be the reality for the next 20 years, and the ability to put all platforms on the agenda, and certainly the ones that are more cost effective, such as the private cloud options that are out there, are going to be, absolutely the way to go. So I'd like to bring in my guests. Let's join Simon. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Rackspace?
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Simon Bennett. I'm the CTO for the private cloud part of Rackspace, which really encompasses private cloud, but especially with most of our customers, hybrid cloud as well. I work mostly with customers around the world and get to see the customer challenges, what they're looking to try and do, how they want to best use technology to support their businesses, really with a bias towards private cloud solutions to make sure that what we do for them meets their needs and fits their own enterprise requirements.
Wow, we're going to get some good details out of you. So Bryan, same thing, introduce yourself, tell us what you do at Rackspace.
Yeah, Bryan Litchford. David, thanks for having us today. I'm responsible for our product management and engineering for our core private cloud platform. So think of anything that sits in a Rackspace data center or customer prem and everything in between. Sits with my product managers and engineers. I've been with Rackspace for a little over 11 years now. I actually started in our data centers. I've worked on both public clouds and private clouds in operations roles. And so really thrilled to, have this chat today.
No, it's great. And I think this is timely because I'm getting the majority of questions I'm getting out there around the utilization of private clouds. And if you notice, a lot of the content I've been putting out, including the YouTube videos and, stuff I'm publishing on InfoWorld, is basically redirecting to owned infrastructure and kind of the alt cloud movement, which is something that's a real thing out there. In other words, people aren't necessarily defaulting, as I mentioned earlier, to some of the public cloud providers. They're viewing those as very expensive and very hard to control, as we just saw in the recent Register article. I think I'm seeing that sentiment out there. And so let's talk about the cost advantages of it. So, at the end of the day, people will point out that, private clouds obviously have a different cost model than the public cloud models, but there's huge amounts of advantages when I think in terms of operational dollars and even acquisition dollars. So Simon, how would you define some of the cost advantages in leveraging private clouds, and specifically private clouds at Rackspace?
I think a couple of things spring to mind immediately in terms of the benefits of private cloud from a cost point of view. First and foremost, many customers, whilst they build their budgets and look at their business cases to move to cloud, they forget the ancillary costs, things like egress fees. They look at things like software licensing or other products they want to extend that may be running in their own private environment and start to run that on public cloud. That has all sorts of on-top costs that they maybe weren't budgeted for or agreed. Then there's the cost of moving to cloud itself. Do you lift and shift, or do you redevelop your applications to be cloud native? The cost of that redevelopment is often undercalled, underplayed, and certainly the time lost in making business change while you're converting your applications all impacts the bottom line for a business. Private cloud often offers an opportunity there to leave what's there today, especially if it's legacy and doesn't need to be modified, and allows a much more solid cost base because it comes out of something the customers know how to estimate and do, often being in their own data center today. So it's probably an easier step-off point to actually understand the costs you're going to incur, why you incur them, and what those day two operational costs truly are.
Simon, back to you with a quick question. What about the whole CapEx, OpEx thing that was drilled into our head around 2008 to 2013? How has that changed?
I think, ourselves, we offer OpEx consumption-based models really for private cloud. So customers don't need to get into that CapEx model to go to the private cloud solution when we're providing those solutions for them. So to a certain extent, that becomes a non-issue. If you can move to something that is, operationalized, if you will, from a cost point of view, then customers can ebb and flow, grow, shrink, still a bit more like a public cloud, but in a private cloud scenario. That allows them to, as their business evolves, the cost evolves with them. That traditionally wasn't something that private cloud used to offer. It is something now. There are opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I always get calls from my clients. They say, well, we want to move to a private cloud. We don't want to deal with the hardware, and we don't happen to have a data center. I said, good news. That the days of doing that are long gone, and the ability to kind of leverage this infrastructure, which is in many cases going to be more cost effective. It's functionally as a service, even though you have access to the hardware resources yourself. Bryan, bring you in here. What about the cost advantages of private cloud? Do you think they're misunderstood out there? Like I just mentioned, they have a expectation of something that was maybe out of date, and in 2025 private clouds are different.
Yeah, I think the first thing is the TCO parameters sometimes are misjudged. If somebody's building a private cloud for themselves and doing it the CapEx way versus the OpEx way, sometimes they look at that front load cost, right, and not take into consideration the total cost of ownership over 2, 3, even 5 years for some workloads. Makes perfect sense to run on similar kit. I think that's something that gets missed in the calculation. And then when you pivot more towards the technology side, there's no doubt that the hyperscalers have some incredible tools, right? They definitely spend a lot from an R&D perspective and innovation, but we've seen this catch up over the last 5 to 10 years, I think, in the private cloud space, especially driven by the open source, software movements, and a lot of the capabilities that previously might have locked you into a hyperscaler can be had on-prem with open source software, and you can run that effectively and efficiently, without having to lift and shift your entire workload into a hyperscaler. For example, serverless. The concept of serverless was a public cloud only notion, I think, for many years. And today, it's something that can be run on any Kubernetes cluster anywhere in the world. And so that flexibility, I think, is giving organizations new options that they might not have had before when they're thinking about how they're going to innovate and develop new solutions to the problems that their business might have, or modernizing stacks that they already have today.
Yeah, I always tell my client, they talk about, well, there's a bunch of innovations going on within the hyperscalers right now, and we want to be part of that innovation, and so we want on those platforms. I always tell them if looking at their own requirements that they're not going to leverage that technology at any point in time in the future, and you're paying for other people's R&D. So other people are taking advantages of the service that they're building into the cost of the public cloud providers, and you don't have the requirements to use it. You're not going to use some of these advanced, some quote unquote advanced services out there. So you get into this pragmatic aspect of what private clouds are and what they're able to provide. And at the end of the day, it's the ability to provide and meet our requirements to bring the most value back to the business. And that's the way the game is played. This is not about, trying to see if you can get the best hype score. And I think that people are realizing that right now. Certainly I'm seeing the indications in the surveys, and some of the sales are going out there, and even some of the weaknesses and some of the public cloud providers that are out there. So one of the things bring up was, the fact of the matter is private cloud now is not the private cloud of 10 years ago. It used to be, 2013, 2015, I was, building private cloud solutions. In many cases, it was an engineering project at the end of the day. It took a lot of time and effort to make that happen. So fast forward 2025, and Bryan, I'll go to you first. The private cloud solutions are significantly better. They're user friendly. They're very much install and go kinds of things, and you're able to get these things up and running fairly quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So you go from a 6 to 12 month project that might have taken place a decade ago down to days, and in some solutions within Rackspace's portfolio, we have capabilities to spin up workloads in minutes and give all those same benefits that you get out of a private cloud with the more favorable economics, the really unmatched performance that you get because you're not sharing much of anything at the end of the day. And then obviously the innovation that has been pushed into the space over years. I think one of the things that, again, if you think about private clouds, 10 years ago, maybe you had some VMware in the environment, but certainly the majority of your workloads weren't virtualized, right? Now I would, venture to say most workloads, if not all, have some level of virtualization. And taking that, into a private cloud now is radically different than going and standing up bare metal servers, deploying your application onto bare metal, as opposed to being able to spin up and spin down VMs, at your leisure. And all the same tools that engineers I know love to use, whether it's Ansible or Puppet or Terraform or OpenTofu, if you like the open source variant, all work with these private cloud platforms. They all have providers for VMware, for OpenStack, for any open source OS that you might want. And so orchestrating and driving a private cloud, similar to how we've conditioned folks to drive public clouds for the last 5 years, is exactly the same. And so those engineering skills transfer easily. A lot of organizations don't really need to think about, this is a private cloud versus a public cloud. They just get the benefits from performance and economics, and can still continue to use a lot of the same tools that, have made their operations more efficient.
Yeah, you don't end up giving up much, and I think at all. And the price is lower, so it's definitely a platform option that should be looked at. Simon, what are your thoughts around the growth of private cloud and the maturation in the last 10 years, as far as what changed, and how are people probably misunderstanding the value of private clouds and probably not making it an architectural option where it should be?
That was originally down to executive scorecards that started off just saying cloud first, and cloud first always meant public cloud when that's the way it was interpreted. I think now, because private cloud is much more widely understood as a term, when people say cloud first can include private cloud. It's not public cloud only. So I think just from a language point of view, that's helped people think maybe differently than they did before. I still often encounter customers that tell me they're cloud first, and then there's a lack of understanding that private cloud can be cloud. It isn't just because it isn't in a hyperscaler data center. It still has all the attributes that Bryan's just described that enable you to treat it like a cloud. So that's the first probably challenge that many people have had to overcome, just because of the language that's used and how it's been interpreted. Then I think on the ground itself, as was said, the familiarity with the tools means that your existing workforce doesn't feel maybe disenfranchised by the move to public cloud. They've still got an essential role to play in running the business. Often that means that the staff you've got today feel more empowered, and actually they want to explore the capabilities in private cloud and drive the best out of it, rather than either having to completely retrain, or in the worst cases, sometimes being swapped out for a different workforce. So it gives people something to look forward to in terms of upskilling themselves, developing their existing skills further to the benefit of the business. That's really a two-pronged part from a people and a language point of view. I think that really counts a lot towards just starting that private cloud journey.
Yeah, private clouds are no longer slow, cumbersome. It's a nimble, powerful platform. It's really kind of a modern stack is there. And I think it's something that people should check out, understand. Well, I guess it's starting to pick up in popularity, at least here. It seems to be a message that was not necessarily well accepted a while ago, but it is being well accepted now. And I think for economic reasons, at the end of the day, the cost advantages of leveraging private clouds and other alternative clouds, by the way, but private cloud specifically, are just too compelling, based on what are the other options out there. And I think a lot of it was a reduction in hardware prices, if you haven't noticed, but it went down like a 45-degree angle, as I read about in my last book. And I think it's always going to be there as an architectural option that in many cases is, guess what? It's providing a core economic advantage. Speaking of economic advantage, everybody's moving quickly to AI, whatever, agentic, generative, and they're trying to redo their infrastructures and the workloads to use AI-based capabilities, but now they're getting sticker shock. As far as when I'm doing the operational planning for these things and looking out in the finance, the FinOps stuff, a 5-year period of operations in a public cloud provider based on the inference they want to do, the kind of processes they want, the virtual systems that they need. It's hugely expensive to the point where if you look at a normal application, an AI version of the application, I'm finding this out and teaching my AI architecture class, is roughly 5 to 6 times as expensive in terms of the operational dollars that are spent on these things. So we have some real challenges right now because guess what? Budgets don't automatically just expand just because we have AI showing up. And so IT out there is running around in circles trying to figure out the most economic way to do that. So how is AI accelerating the adoption of private clouds, and what should enterprises look for specifically? So I'm going to go back to you first.
I'll start with a different lens on it, not just cost, but looking after data, sovereign solutions, especially my side of the pond, looking in Europe and the UK. People want sovereign solutions. They want to know where their data is. They're worried about AI looking at some of their most valuable IP and getting AI to do that. So there is a nervousness in many cases, and especially in regulated industries, healthcare, banking in this part of the world, where people want that data only to be processed by AI in somewhere where they know exactly where it is and there's no risk of exfiltration of that data. That's driving some conversations with AI towards private cloud, notwithstanding the cost of doing it. In terms of the cost of actually running it, pulling in data from all sorts of sources, I mentioned egress charges. Again, if people have put some data in the public cloud and they're pulling it back to private to run AI models, not only have you got the AI cost, you've got the cost of moving that data all over the place and the challenges of security that sit with that, with the extended supply chain of data all over from the edge to the public cloud and into private. In many cases, harnessing that data where it exists today in the data center is a much easier, lower tariff solution. And finally, in terms of deployment, one thing that we found, or I've certainly found with the customers I've dealt with who've been experimenting with AI in the public cloud, unfettered access to GPUs causes large cost overruns because they can just grow and expand in an elastic, uncontrolled manner. Doing this in a private capacity starts to impose a good discipline on the developers from day one, and they know they've got a finite resource. They often write more efficient code, and they're looking at AI in a very different way in a private context than they are in public when, frankly, you can grab as much resource as you need.
That's, I think, kind of the key advantages of leveraging it, because you can put more control over the resources that are under management. And the GPU costs are just crazy right now. I'm having clients that are calling me up. They're getting $200,000 AI bills, at the end of the month, where they're just doing, some basic prototyping. And I think that's because they don't necessarily understand how private clouds are billing these things out. And also they think if, they push back and Bryan, I'm going to you, they go, well, we're trying to get to a scalable architecture and an agile architecture. That's why we're moving into public cloud providers. That's not the case. Private cloud is able to do that. Is that correct, Bryan?
Let's look at AI, I think, from like a much longer lens. Right now, so much time and attention is spent on training the next model, right? Just eking out that next, few percentage points of intelligence, if you will, out of each incremental model that's created. A lot of enterprises are starting to, work with some of these tools, right? It embed them into their workflows. But in the long lens, organizations don't get benefits from training a model. They get benefits from the inferencing of that model they've created in that application that is serving some use case, some value to either their internal employees, to their customers. And I like to think of it as, where do we expect AI to be at a point of interaction, right? And we don't expect them to be in a hyperscaler. We expect them to be on users' devices. We expect them to be at the edge. If you're going to go into a retail location or a bank branch, for example, you're not going to entrust this customer-centric experience that you've invested tons of money into on a single connection back to a hyperscaler. You're going to want that inferencing workload to run, in the data center, or sorry, in the point of interaction, right? And I think, it doesn't require a $500,000 server to make that happen from an inferencing. And so investing in understanding how you can use private cloud workloads to extend these footprints to any geolocation in the world that you need to, I think becomes a really important part of an AI strategy for any CIO, CTO starting to look at how they roll out some of these capabilities to their organizations. For a simple chatbot, makes total sense to have that centralized somewhere, be it in a private cloud or otherwise. But when you're talking about some of the solutions that will bring and show real value to end users, those are going to be where the interactions are. And private clouds and a private cloud focused ecosystem can help bring those applications to your users, where I think just locking yourself into a hyperscaler tool might be a challenge to make that extensible to customers where they're going to get value.
I think in many instances, people believe that their cloud selection, whether it's private, public, multi-cloud, whatever, is going to be a static choice, moving forward. At the end of the day, private clouds provide you an option as a way which you can run applications, workloads in areas that are going to be much more cost effective than running it in the public cloud providers now. So when the enterprises get into maximizing the value of this technology, at the end of the day, their ability to have private cloud platforms, public cloud platforms, and the ability to localize their workloads on whatever is going to bring the most value back to the business. In many cases, surprisingly, private clouds fit the bill many times. That becomes the goal here. Is that your perspective, Simon?
Yeah, I think it's being opinionated about where to place the workload for best benefit for the business. And portability is often a really important thing, especially for multinationals. They may want to operate in a country where the hyperscaler of choice doesn't exist. So how do you deploy the same solution without re-engineering it fully? You use open source, you make sure your applications are built with portability. That doesn't mean that it's one or the other. It is giving choice. It's allowing the developers to do something that says, if I need the same application in the center, or I need it at the edge, or I need it in a country where my hyperscaler of choice is not there, well, I've got a private cloud option. And that's before you get into the cost factor then, which looks at it. So ultimately, there's a number of different dimensions to choice. It is cost, it is portability, it's flexibility to meet where the business needs. They may move into a country, they may move back out of it. If I can deploy my application there, stay in line with whatever regulations that country may impose. There's different regulations in banking where some things are not allowed to go in a public cloud. So make sure you've designed something that can go where it meets the needs of wherever you might take your own business in an efficient manner. So the cost question then gets answered, but the portability one for many companies, if they want to, especially if they're growing and going into new locations, is massively important.
Yeah, I think the choice thing is a big factor right now. And in many cases, when I build DevOps tool chains and DevOps processes, the developers will have the key platform selection that they can make, and to localize them on a public cloud provider, private cloud provider, edge computing. To your point, Brian, we're going to run this stuff all over the place. And that choice, that flexibility, and certainly looking at cost and even sustainability things, or how much electricity they run, is something that we didn't have a few years ago. Everybody was basically defaulting to pushing stuff on the public cloud providers. And now we're taking the cost advantages into looking at different platforms, including private cloud. So Brian, what should enterprises consider as the direction of this choice? In other words, where do you think that's going to morph them, and what's going to reemerge as something that's important as people are picking platforms?
I see two factors here, right? Simon's mentioned it quite a bit. I think data sovereignty and compliance is going to be a real thing, right? That regulation is only going to expand. I think we're going to see organizations having to deal with different rules of the road, if you will, based on where they're doing business. And if you can't quickly adapt to those different standards and have that flexibility, which I think private clouds can provide to you because they are isolated, by nature, it's going to be difficult to work in kind of a global economy. I think that's the first, piece of this. And then I think the second in my mind is really comes down to performance, right? Of course, the hyperscalers and public clouds will throw tons and tons of highly performant equipment into their ecosystems, but like you just said around GPU workloads, right? They are like 5x what it might cost to run elsewhere, and the workload to workload comparison is crazy. Those new technologies are incredibly expensive until they're adopted in mass, and then the prices start to come down. Whereas I think private cloud, you get to start with that return on investment straight away, right? You can because you're working in an isolated and localized fashion, you know exactly what your input costs are going to be. And in a private cloud, you get 100% of what you buy, right? There is no sharing. There is no dependency on, some other customer or organization on the same equipment, not overusing their share of the the stack. You're not beholden to, those constraints in a private cloud setting, where performance is going to be, the determining factor for a lot of these applications, right? At some point, hardware stops getting faster and faster and faster every single year. It starts to slow down, and so how do you make sure that you're getting every ounce of performance so that your developers, your engineers can write the next application that they want to write, or push the next update that gives the end users the benefits they're looking for? I think there's a lot that can be can be gleaned from just a performance advantage. I'll give you you didn't ask for it, but I'll give you one example. Right, we're working with an ad tech company. They broker mobile and web ads for organizations. So they've got buyers and sellers on their platform at any given time, and they were cloud native. Right, they started in the hyperscalers, and they bounced around from hyperscaler to hyperscaler to try and get the best deal that they possibly could. And what they found is that as they started to grow, their revenue grew. As their revenue grew, their costs grew directly in line with those revenues, right? So they weren't getting, the economic benefits from their growth, right? In terms of margin dollars. We work with them to streamline some of their workload. They knew that like 85% of their capacity in those public clouds was running 24/7. They only needed a little bit of burst. And so we took a large portion of that. We put it onto into a private cloud environment running Kubernetes in our data centers on current gen server equipment. And lo and behold, they needed about a third less of compute that they thought they needed in the hyperscalers. We were saving them tons of money. And so they were able to handle some of their burst in their private cloud. And then when they truly needed that on demand for a few hours capacity, they used the hyperscalers. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that has been something that has helped them succeed financially. And then they can roll out those capabilities into new regions when they need to. And they can still use the hyperscalers when they want to go test the market, but they're not quite sure they want to stay there. They can use a hyperscaler temporarily, see if they have a good business fit, with consumers in the market. And if so, then we go and deploy, a private cloud footprint for them to help them grow in a scalable and, performant manner.
I love that. They're turning choice into value. And also we're not giving things up. It's the whole thing. There is no law that we have to, either go one way or the other. The reality is you're providing yourself with options that'll provide you, and the options have to compete against each other as far as who's going to provide the best value. Why wouldn't you want that? And I always get confused when that keeps coming up. So Simon, what advice would you give to the modern decision maker who's out there trying to figure out, very much like the case study Bryan just went over, as far as what path you need to take and, stepwise, how should they consider their existing problem domain and considering all platform options, including private clouds?
So I think a couple of things, and Bryan talked about it a little bit in the example he gave. Firstly, that portability aspect, the ability to run the same workload in multiple places. I think that if you're redeveloping your application is imperative. Even if you're in public cloud, you don't want to be locked into one public cloud provider. You need the ability to be able to redeploy that application where you see fit, when you need to do it. So I think that giving yourself choice is important. I think secondly, from an architectural patterning point of view and a workload point of view, how truly elastic is the demand on your workload? Is it really, massive peaks and troughs, or is it something that, 90% of the time runs in steady state? If that 90% steady state is exactly that, then really look at the cost models that go with the choice of private or public. And you'll be often pleasantly surprised that private can offer a much different price point to run those same workloads than they would maybe in that public cloud. The third aspect is performance. If you really want to control your performance and know what you're going to do, get the biggest sort of return on your configuration, then again, private cloud shouldn't be overlooked, because you can tune the private cloud to your needs, maybe much more than you can in a generalized compute environment in a public cloud. You've got access right down to the bare metal in a way that means if your application can take advantage of it, it absolutely should. And you really are getting value, not only out of what you're doing, but the individual chipset and its capability. Private cloud gives you all of that opportunity and choice.
Well put. So, Bryan, anything you can add to that? Any words of advice or words of wisdom that the modern IT decision makers can use to go out and pick the right platform?
I mean, I think Simon hit the nail on the head, and he's got a much better accent than I do. It sounds way better coming from him. No, I would just highlight the benefit of choice, right? I think decision makers need to understand their options. Public clouds provide incredible value in certain cases. Private clouds provide incredible value, in a lot of cases. And being able to differentiate, between the two, I think is important. And knowing that there are options, I think, is one of the smartest things any decision maker, can have, right? And so understanding, learning, being aware of what your options are, so that you're not cornered into, this is the only way I can do anything for the rest of my career, for the rest of the existence of this workload. I think is the key point to take away from here.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. That I think, looking at the pragmatic aspects of this isn't a selling, this is looking, this is advising, this is, consider all your options, including the private cloud providers. So we got a few questions. And by the way, if we don't get to your questions, go ahead and put them down in the comments below. And I'll throw this out there for either of you. Just, someone let me know. For organizations considering a shift, what are the red flag signs that a workload truly belongs on a private cloud instead of public cloud? Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I can. I'll go ahead, Simon. Yeah. Okay. Well, I would hit. We talked a little bit about those always-on workloads, right? If a workload is running even 90% of the hours of the week, you probably should consider a private cloud platform. You'll likely get a reduction in cost, but also an increase in performance with that reduction. And so, looking workload by workload where it makes sense is the first red flag in my mind. The second, I would say, is unless you are truly invested and truly developing against some of the niche feature and service specific capabilities that hyperscalers bring to the table, you probably have a workload that's flexible and doesn't actually need to be there, right? Unless you are truly writing your core value to your end customers to one of those tools and systems. I think you should consider whether you're just renting that space at maybe above market value, or you're getting the value that you think you are. Simon, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, one thing I would add is if you're in an environment that is regulated and you can't tolerate the updates being pushed onto your estate, pushed onto your stack, and you want to have full control over the stack you deploy and any upgrades that you do when you do it with the outages you can afford or tolerate as a business, then maybe, again, private cloud might offer you that ability to lock down your environment in a way that absolutely meets your operational needs in terms of upgrades and change. And even when that application's maybe a little bit out of date because you can't change it or you're running a legacy application, Sometimes that may not be easily supportable on a public cloud, and private still gives you that extended roadmap or extended future for some of the legacy applications that may not be in a fit state to be upgraded right now.
I love that. And let's consider some of the sovereignty thing with this next question. Go to you, Simon, for this one. How do you see the role of private cloud evolving with the rapid progress of AI, especially as regulations and privacy needs grow? I know you're dealing that with the EU right now. What do you think?
Well, regulation's only going to get more and more. It's never going away. And then you've got the geopolitics coming into play right now, especially in Europe, where people are saying, I want to have my data within my country boundaries. I want it only to be serviced by employees or engineers sitting in my country boundaries. I think there was another announcement by Microsoft today about creating another sovereign solution in response to regulators in Europe. So I think that will maybe spread around the world. There may be a degree of contagion around that, where people are saying, I want local folk managing my environment. With the private cloud, you can do that. You can have engineers that are based in, where they are physically, which country they reside in. They may have all the right accreditations as well. And then you look at the networking aspect as well. Where might that data be exfiltrated or run? And even now, some organizations are saying, I really need to close the boundaries of where my application is accessed from. And I'd rather have one that's accessed globally. I'd rather have regional implementations that also reduce the blast radius if I get attacked by cyber threats as well. That leads to more regionalized or localized systems that are, with a wall around each one. That allows and can be delivered in many ways by private cloud quite simply by replicating and changing those solutions in a way that gives that autonomy and isolation.
Well put. Anything to add to that, Bryan?
No, I mean, great answer, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go to the next question. Bryan, I'm going to go to you for this one. What are some of the biggest pitfalls or misconceptions organizations encounter when calculating total cost of ownership or TCO across private and public clouds? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the first thing would be, understanding TCO at scale, right? Something can feel very agile at $5,000 or $10,000 a month, in a hyperscaler, but then it immediately breaks at $500,000 a month or more, right? Back to that kind of case I talked about a little bit earlier. Early on in that organization, that ad tech company's growth, like it was fine, right? It was perfectly fine. But as they scaled, it became untenable. And I think, you have to consider, what that workload looks like at day one and what that workload looks like at, day 201. The next thing is the, how you model a footprint for a private cloud environment. Now in an OpEx scenario, like with Rackspace, we offer private clouds in an OpEx model, so the TCO comparisons are a lot easier to go and do. But if you're considering building your private cloud, yourself, some people look at that initial hardware cost up front as a really big expense and a big negative, compared to the entry month to month price that you might get out of a hyperscaler. And I think, again, expanding that time horizon and understanding what does the world look like over the next 1, 2, or 3 years for this workload or this application is really important, right? A lot of workloads, once they're deployed, run for years and years and years and years, right? They aren't dropping off after 6 months. And so when you kind of have that confidence and understanding in your application stack and the different workloads that you run and manage, it can make that TCO a little bit more clear for you.
Awesome answer. Anything to add, Simon?
Yeah, very, very briefly. One thing I'd say is many TCO studies that I've read in the past are created with rose-tinted glasses, and they're very optimistic about the cost of either change or delivering something. I think everyone needs to be a bit more hard-nosed about creating a TCO and look not only at the day one costs, but the true run costs, as Bryan said. I think your day two operational cost for all sorts of aspects needs to be taken into account. And things like the people costs may be ignored over time with more specialist skills or more scarce skills that may be needed, often aren't taken into account when the studies are done. They only look at the cloud cost metric. They don't look at the whole of ownership metric. And I think that's vital.
Let's go to the last question. Bryan, I'll go to you for this one. Can you share an example of how the hybrid approach, blending private and public clouds, helped a customer unlock new value or innovation?
Yeah, that's a good one, right? I'm gonna lean into AI. It's one we're working on right now. So Rackspace over the last couple of years has been investing quite heavily in the healthcare space, right? We think that hospitals run these really complex, really mission critical, life critical applications, and we felt like private cloud is just a great fit for a lot of those workloads, and it's an incredible set of organizations to work with, just personally. One of the things that we see from some of the research hospitals we've worked with is that they have pretty mature research stacks and are big users of high performance computing, right? And so one of the organizations we work with, we built out an HPC environment in our private cloud that is being used by their university researchers. It is adjacent to the data sets that run the hospitals, so they have access to that, can do the work that they need to do each day. But as AI came along, there were some questions about, hey, we want to look at maybe like a simple chatbot, but we want it completely separate from our data set. And so we've started working with them where we've created a little chatbot in the public cloud to let them test out a few things, right? And used a connection between the private and public cloud so that they can use the same SSO and all that fun stuff. And as that has matured, it gets to an inflection point, and we'll bring it back in-house because we already have that HPC cluster. We've got the density and capacity. And so we're using a public cloud to do a little bit of really light testing and innovation. And when I say light testing, I mean we turn it on for 3 or 4 hours a day and then shut it off, right? And so there is no alternative to that capability from a public cloud, but you've got to use it the right way. We're not letting it run 24/7. We're not letting the whole hospital system onto it at one time. We're testing with a few select users and then shutting it down. And as it reaches a level of maturity where we're comfortable, expanding that out to a wider group, that's where we pivot that technology right back onto a private cloud and unleash it on the organization. And so, hybrid clouds, public clouds make a great use case when you need to test out something new quite quickly. Maybe you have a moonshot project that comes up. Developers should feel comfortable, engineers should feel comfortable and empowered to go and use those technologies. And then once it is ready to hit scale, then I think you need to do that, that true and honest TCO evaluation before you determine which platform it's going to land on.
I love that answer. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but Simon, can you tell us where we can go on the web to find out more about Rackspace and their private cloud solutions?
I think just start at the main entry point for Rackspace, www.rackspace.com. It's a great place to start. You can then look at all the things that we offer and dive into all our private cloud offerings, as well as what we do in the public cloud space, because ultimately the world is hybrid. There's a lot of private, but we live in a hybrid world from a cloud point of view. I think it's good to get the point of view from both sides of the house.
That's great. And I'm going to go ahead and put the website up on the screen as well as in the description below if you want to check out those solutions. I urge you to do that because at the end of the day, this is a matter of us getting to a choice, their ability to choose the right platforms for the appropriate workloads and business case that's out there. And I think it's a great discussion as we learn to understand the architectural options that are in front of us now, and certainly as we're making decisions around AI, which is going to be strategically important, but also hugely expensive, that we're going to have to figure out a tactical way to do that. So Simon, thank you for being here. Bryan, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very
much, David. Thank you.
This is great.
You got it. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Also check out the other videos here. Also urge you to check out our guests and their LinkedIn profiles and other social media profiles out there, as well as Rackspace.com for the solutions that they have. So until next time, you guys stay very safe. Cheers.